Hey there, I'm Jeremy Watson. I'm a group product manager here at GitLab. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about usage ping and the benefits to enabling usage ping. So, what is usage ping? Well, it's a feature that is totally optional in GitLab that allows you to share a selective amount of anonymized information about how you're using GitLab. So, self managed instances with this enabled will attempt to send a weekly payload to an endpoint that GitLab Inc. controls, and it sends a JSON payload of an aggregated anonymized data that helps us better understand how our customers are using the product. Now, usage ping is, again, I'll emphasize, anonymized, aggregated, and the only thing that we is used for is to understand how people are using the product and how we can make it better. The privacy policy that we have that we use in GitLab states as follows: that only aggregates of usage data get sent. No project names or other content is sent to GitLab, and you can view the exact payload of usage ping in the admin panel. Now, this data is really important for us since we have so many customers at GitLab that are using GitLab in a self-managed kind of deployment pattern. And we really love to better understand how folks are using GitLab. We use this data to kind of power performance indicators that we have like scattered throughout our handbook. You can see a lot of them there. And these are things like average stages per user, where we want to be able to understand and drive more activity towards more and more people who are using GitLab using more and more stages, which we've discovered is highly correlated to people being more engaged with the product and finding the product more valuable. So if we can drive people towards those behaviors and those moments of discovery, it's a win for GitLab Inc. and it's also a win for our users. So those are the types of insights that we try to pull out from usage data. You can see a lot of those throughout our handbook. I'm also going to talk about a little bit about the benefits of enabling usage ping. So like the privacy policy states, you can opt out of usage ping and you can view the exact payload of usage ping in the admin panel of GitLab. So let me go ahead and show you kind of what that looks like. So here I'm in the admin area of a GitLab instance, and I'm going to scroll down here to metrics and profiling. And I'll open that up and I'll click on this usage statistics area where I can see that usage ping is disabled. So out of the box, usage ping is enabled by default. You can easily disable it here in settings. But for this demo, I'm going to showcase kind of the benefits that you get out of usage ping because it enables two interesting features, DevOps score and cohorts, that are helpful for our users. So if I'm a little uncomfortable with kind of what is being provided in the payload, I can just go ahead and preview that, and this is exactly what's going to be sent to GitLab Inc. So you can see there's some information here about the licensee and company and my license, how many users are in it. And again, simple aggregated counts about how many boards that we have, how many builds have we done, how many environments do we have, but no specific project names and just simple kind of usage statistics. There's some information here about whether or not we're using certain features. But other than that, it's pretty much anonymous. So I'm going to go ahead and click Enable Usage Ping, and I'll hit Save Changes here. And what that should do is it should enable a couple of features here in the analytics area of the instance. So I talked about these, I mentioned these earlier, DevOps score and cohorts. So right now we're looking at DevOps score. And right now, what DevOps score wants to do is it wants to aggregate your usage in GitLab into a single number to try to help you understand how well you're adopting GitLab and how effectively you're kind of using it related to other instances that we're collecting usage ping from. I think this is why usage ping is valuable, because we can start comparing your usage to kind of how other instances are using GitLab as well. We hope to do a lot more interesting things with this in the future. But I think that one of the most interesting use cases for this particular feature is just understanding kind of ROI at the very highest level. Are we actually leveraging as much of GitLab as we can to get the most that we can from our investment? And this number here, let me first explain kind of how these numbers are calculated. So, for each one of these containers, we calculate an individual score, which is averaged up across all these percentages into this average index score. So for issues, like for example, we calculate the number of issues that are created per active user on the instance, and then we have a particular value here. We compare that to other instances. The lead instance currently has 3.3 issues being created per active user. To get this individual score for this container, we divide 1.4 by 3.3, and that gives us 42.1%. Now, what I like to use this particular feature for is just to understand whether or not we are using features across the instance. So if there are particular teams that are particularly active and engaged in GitLab and getting a lot of value out of that, then I can understand whether or not those are features that other teams can kind of leverage and use. So here, for instance, you can see that milestones might be something that could be leveraged better across the entire organization. More than anything else, like you see that no one is using Service Desk, and that could be something of an interesting feature that we could kind of use and leverage for a variety of use cases. So while it looks like we're taking amazing advantage of monitoring, Service Desk might be something that we could investigate using more of. So by the fact that this is, we have 9 out of 10 of these containers being used, we're clearly getting a lot of value out of GitLab. But for many instances, the picture is very different, where many of these containers have zeros in them, and there's a wide difference between how our instances are using GitLab and the lead. So I think those are the areas, if I'm a GitLab administrator trying to understand and answer the question of, are we getting a return on investment from our activity in GitLab? This can identify areas of attention where you can possibly leverage CI, CD, monitoring in order to get an even more value out of the product. The other thing that I think is pretty cool is cohorts. And now cohorts, what you're seeing here is essentially like a depiction of retention across the instance. So on the left-hand side, you see a table of registration months for the past 12 periods, a column of inactive users, and a column of new users. So taking a look at January 2020, you can see that we had 34 in the inactive column plus the new user column, number of users that registered. 11 of those had no activity whatsoever, despite their registration. So they registered and they did nothing. And then 23 of these users took some action. And over on the right-hand side, you can see how many of those users actually returned. So of those 23 users, you can see that 22 users in month one, which would be February in this case, February 2020, came back and then took an additional action in that month. And then in the subsequent month, we had 21 users that came back from the original cohort of 23 new users that were active, and then so on and so forth. So what this is really helpful for is it really helps better understand kind of like your user activity at a 10,000-foot view. So you can clearly see here that in January, we actually had really high engagement from this original cohort of 23 users, where we actually were 5 months later, we still have 73% of this cohort returning and continuing to use the product. So that's a really good sign. The initial kind of tiger team who initially kicked the tires on GitLab and initially started using it, maybe a core group of developers who are really passionate about the product, continue to actually get a lot of value out of it. So if I'm thinking about how to kind of maintain my seat count, or it looks like there's a cohort of passionate users that's continuing to use the product and really enjoys it. That's great to see. But if you look a little bit further down, you can see that in April 2020, you actually had 296 users that joined. And of this cohort of 255 users, only 24 of them returned the following month. And then you only had 7 users that actually returned in 2 months later. So clearly there's a cohort of users that has been joining recently, especially in more and more recent months, that's not seeing the kind of value that's compelling them to return to GitLab. So this is really interesting for 2 reasons. If I'm an administrator in an organization that's rolling out GitLab and maintaining a large seat count, it helps me make better decisions on how to manage that seat count. If there are users here that, if I want to be able to readily understand how many seats that I can reclaim if I decide to remove inactive users from my instance, well, I can simply look at the first column of this inactive users column, and I can see right away that there's about 249 users on this instance that are currently inactive and are not kind of getting the value that we want to get out of GitLab. And number 2, it helps me understand how people are using the product. So like I mentioned, when we first started the instance in January 2020, there are a ton of users that are getting like a lot of value out of the small group of passionate developers who continue to use the product. But users that are registering now are clearly not getting the value. So how can I enable them to use the product? How can I train them to get value out of the product? Are there areas of do I need to work on documentation? And do I know these users um, who are registering? And how can I reach out to them and take action to help them get value out of this product that my organization has adopted? That is kind of the way that cohorts, I think, is really helpful. So I can take this information and then I can go and then look at the user's API or the user's admin panel here in GitLab and start taking action. Help my users kind of better understand how to use GitLab, how to get value out of the product. And all of this is kind of in a single pane of glass that we want to do a lot more with over the future. But these are two features that you have to have usage ping enabled in order to take advantage of. So I think usage ping is something that respects our users' privacy, but also it does a lot for GitLab Inc. to help us educate the product team and make the product better. So hopefully you get some use out of DevOps Score and Cohorts, which I think are both useful features. And that's kind of what you get out of enabling usage ping. Thanks for watching. Cheers.